My question is, to what extent does the migration policies intersect with issues of racism and, and Islamophobia?
First, I totally contest the notion of Islamophobia. Racism is a different story, but I want to have and to keep my right to criticize some beliefs. And the notion of Islamophobia prevents me from doing that. And even sometimes prevents me from criticizing radical Islam. And this is something I'm not going to accept. So this one is dismissed. To what extent it intersects with racism? Again, we're speaking here about a concept that is extremely politicized and has been used also as a Trojan horse to prevent, from doing sometimes common sense things like controlling your borders. Everyone controls the border. Absolutely everyone controlling the borders. I don't know why Europeans wouldn't be allowed to do it. And again, for you to decide what is racism or not, but if it's, for example, like to control the borders to make sure that only people who have been chosen by the country of destination can come to this country, then for you to decide whether this is racism or not. And whether it's also for the country of destination to decide whether they can import like critical masses of people who do not share the same values and the same culture, and this is going to create a lot of frictions for you to decide whether it is racism or not. For me, it's pure common sense.
So to what extent do migration policies and racism and indeed Islamophobia intersect? So I agree with Rodrigo. I think the word Islamophobia has become a claim to dismiss any sort of criticism. I think we should be free to criticize things on basis of culture. In terms of racism, I think if you go back 50, 60 years in England, my grandparents' generation, pretty racist. But actually, we're not as much racist as people seem to think. Just the language wasn't what we term politically correct, but they were still quite gracious to people, I think, generally speaking. But what you tend to see in the UK, and putting aside what's happened the last 5 years, because Twitter is a feverish space, but in the real world, when you meet people on trains and so on, what people tend to think is they don't say, we have no problem with any particular group of people. There's just too many of them here. So the objection is not actually qualitative, who they are, their race. It's quantitative. There are too many people. And I don't think that's necessarily, that's not racism. That's just founded in, I think, a concern about demographic shifts, which do have qualitative changes on the culture, not because we think necessarily our culture is better, but simply because it is our culture. It simply is. And so it's not to say it is better, value loaded, but what is familiar, one does not like to see it change. And being from the UK has changed very, very quickly in recent decades.